Mariam Hashemi is the founding director of NovaSpere Consulting and is also works at Ryerson. She's been a great conversation as we work together over the last couple of weeks. She really focuses on that intersection of thought, action, and imagination. She's a higher ed professional, but she also brings that view and that passion as a philosopher, as an artist. She's worked for private sectors for the last 15 years. She also has master's in human design, human systems design. She has a bachelor in philosophy in French. And she also has accreditations in mindfulness and facilitation and building healthy communities here, healthy organizations. She looks at designing innovative cultures and it does a lot with the human creativity. She's a great artist, and she also works with ethical artificial intelligence. It has been she brings a great deal of insight and passion to this, really looking at curriculum and how curriculum needs to evolve and how we can evolve curriculum with the changing learner. So without any further ado or introduction, I'll turn it over to you, Mariam.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate speaking to you all, and I think I'm very passionate about this topic, as Matt said, because I think it's important. And I don't think we can talk about all of these things, curriculum, co-design, the future learner, without first considering the purpose of education. To understand the future of education, we need to look at the purpose of education from a historical perspective, how we see, how we think. And for me, education is perception. It's teaching us how to look at the world, how to interact with the world, how to make connections. Many of you are aware of systems thinking. It's a way of seeing interconnectedness and fragments as part of greater wholes, ecosystems within systems, learning from and acting with each other in their respective environments. And if we look at human systems and education systems over time, we see that paradigm shifts occur at the margins with creative outliers and originals. And it typically takes about 50 years for new thought to become mainstream. This means the rate of change is generally slow, and it's part of the bureaucratic barriers to movement and progress in the way that our current higher education system is set up, with lifelong tenure, lengthy accreditation, program reviews, grandfathered textbooks, and systems of hierarchy that are very comfortable with the status quo until now. Education also helps us see. It's a holistic endeavor that used to include the arts, sports, other disciplines. And over time, we created these degrees in separate fields so that one person knows a lot about a little rather than a little about a lot. And what we've done is separated our minds from our bodies, teaching and learning like we're empty shells with disembodied cortexes. Over time, we've come to see a return to holistic learning and a reintegration of our minds and bodies. Mindfulness is now being taught at MBA schools. Executives are taking meditation retreats, and doctors are learning about psychosomatic illnesses. Education is also about how we learn. So we've come to see that learning has changed over time. Keeping in mind that we're systems within systems, we've come to see that thinking and being is integrative. And this integrative being leads us to ecological learning. We're ecological learners. We're learning all the time from everything and everyone around us. From the time that we're conceived to the time that we die, we're learning. And this means that education and curricula is not limited anymore to the classroom. It's about life, it's about us, it's about others and the world around us. It's a multi-layered, cyclic, dynamic learning process. When we look at higher education, we see that over time, the scope of measure and rate of adaptation has also changed. During times of great stress and increased complexity, we see an opportunity for educational paradigm shifts. Think of the Industrial Revolution. And so if we think about humans and systems over time, we recognize that education is due for and in the midst of a cultural shift. When we consider the purpose of education, we also have to, as Matt mentioned in his talk, Think about the stakeholders. Why we educate depends on who we ask. Everyone has a vested interest, a different stake in why we believe education is important. The reasons why we educate are changing, and the future learner is changing. And so what we need to adapt to is what and how we teach. University space obsolescence. We need to focus our gaze and look at the patterns that are emerging. This is one of my favorite infographics from the Pew Center. It talks again to some of the points Matt mentioned about values and how digital natives and techaholics are in a different environment. They have different needs and different interactions, different aspirations, different values, different ways of seeing the world. They're going to be moving away from the current educational paradigm and methods where we try to catch up to Generation Z. And it's hard to do when we have lifelong tenured researchers who are maturists or baby boomers. As soon as Facebook is out, Snapchat is in. As soon as MySpace is out, Instagram is in. And the list goes on. How do we keep up? Why would anyone pay hundreds of thousands of dollars when they can learn almost anything for free? Higher education has to evolve in order to offer something of value beyond prestige and connectedness. And that can only be done by, Matt alluded to this, decoding what is of value to those who are its target demographic and understanding how those informal networks are being formed. Not only that, but the nature of the future learner is changing. Consider this, the average human now has a shorter attention span than that of a goldfish. Anthropologists are saying our thumbs are getting bigger. Neuroscientists are saying our neurocircuitry is changing. The reward centers in our brains are becoming addicted to highly digitized validation schemas, psychic avatars, and many people are choosing computers over cuddles. This impacts how we connect, how we learn, and how we teach. So we come to rethinking education. Why change now? Why do anything? Why not just add some new software, spice up some curricula with a co-op capstone or experiential learning course? Because we need to understand the root of the problem from a systems perspective. We're operating in a bigger world here and we're using industrial era methods and content in a post-industrial age. Our methods simply aren't working. They're out of date. By the time students graduate, new technologies, rate of information exponentially has increased and alumni are facing multiple career shifts. Micro-credentialing is becoming popular. Companies are creating in-house training. Many organizations no longer even require degrees. In order for us to recognize the magnitude of the problem and the impending obsolescence, we need to understand the iceberg metaphor. Degrees, accreditations, vocational success, that's at the top. That's what we see. Underneath are our limiting mental models, our beliefs, our assumptions, our cultural biases, and a plethora of things hidden from view. And so if we only address what's at the top, we'll be missing a big piece of the picture, the hidden part at the bottom that has the highest impact. So as we consider this iceberg metaphor, things hidden from view, things that we can see, we're also trying to make sense out of chaos and order. The noise, the information overload, the new discoveries, we're seeking structure, planning, design, and curricula prep. This is a term by D. Hawk from Visa International, chaotic. And it's a concept. What I like most about it is that our optimal locus of control is at the edge of chaos and order, in that chaotic middle, which bridges both sides of a polarity, a space that resembles our world, ordered within chaos and chaotic within order. And so I appreciate that we've covered quite a bit of ground. We're coming closer to co-design, just one more conceptual piece about change. There's a lot of different change models out there, and this one by Lewin, to me, is an easy one to understand, because when we change, we're moving from a current state to a future state. And in order for that to happen, we need to undergo a middle state that doesn't always feel comfortable or productive, but it's absolutely necessary in order for us to reach our desired state. And this means if we want higher education to change, we need to move toward a desired future. And if we don't know what that is, we'll end up replicating more of the same, piecemealing pilot projects here and there without ever considering rejigging the whole. That piecemealing then undermines the future vision of where we want to be. Remember, the stakes are pretty high at this point. We're facing the potential obsolescence of higher education as we know it. And the last point here is about systems thinking. Drawing from the natural world processes and perceptions of reality. This means physics, math, art, various other disciplines. They all follow one very simple logic, and that's biomimicry and fractal patterning. That's the golden ratio. This means looking at higher education in a way to find natural patterns emerging. So where is innovation succeeding? What's happening at the organizational level? Which departments have the best cohesiveness and ability to make decisions? Matt talked about the organizations that are most successful. What made them successful? By looking at these patterns, one discovers commonalities, and that brings us to co-designing principles. Here is a visual of the Darwin matrix. This is a fabulous way to conceptualize design thinking and systems mapping. It's a new technology by a brilliant friend of mine in the UK, John Rainford. The reason I am sharing it here today is because it perfectly illustrates how the co-design of curricula for the future learner has to have whole system engagement with adaptability in real time and reveal the mental models that are in use about how we see the world and the curricula we teach. What I'm proposing here is not that you must use the software, but that you can use this way of mapping to better understand how to co-design your curricula, especially when you're dealing in a complex, multi-layered organization. These maps reveal the inner structures of design thinking, the interconnectedness, the interdisciplinary, intergenerational, and intercultural components. We're facing disruption in education. We need to figure out how to be sustainable and relevant. With the future of technology, we have free courses, YouTube, apprenticeships, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, wearables, biologically enhanced memory. The way we used to do things won't work. For teaching, for assessment, for any of the stuff that we're used to presenting rote learning. So how do we start about the colossal task of co-designing a desired future? What we need to do is to create a vision of what we want our world to look like, how we want to interact with each other, and what values hold the fabric of our societies and our communities together. We're seeing this in business as the old way of working is becoming obsolete, and consumers, Matt again talked about this, are demanding eco-conscious consumers, voting with their wallets, and which corporations they want to support. This means becoming aware of the future learner, their value systems, their hopes, their aspirations, and their imagined futures. In order to remain relevant and sustainable, we must cultivate reflexive, innovative cultures and redefine our outdated notions of stakeholders. We've moved from institutions that are created for the pursuit of enlightenment, of knowledge, to vocational institutions, to micro-credentialing, and rethinking the adaptability requires rethinking education, rethinking stakeholders, rethinking learning. The World Economic Forum and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development have listed the skills taught in 2020 as being completely obsolete by 2030. Most of the jobs of the future have not even yet been invented. Google, Salesforce, a lot of other companies are focused on identifying gaps in education because there's an opportunity. There's a lot of resources being spent in trying to figure out what the future will look like. My suggestion is that we'll see a trend towards self-mastery, a focus on relationships, communications, boundaries, emotional literacy, agility, creativity, making new connections, and solid conceptual frameworks. How to articulate ideas, bridge differences, make decisions, build consensus. CEOs have identified the top mindsets, how to think for future learners, future leaders. They're about being global citizens, explorers, servants, servant leaders. The top skills of how to do, being futurists, translators, Yoda as in being able to master the self. Technological teenagers, people who are able to, be at ease with new technology, always willing to learn. So the idea of learning how to learn. And this means creating bottom-up processes, peer-to-peer learning, interdisciplinary communication, and holistic approaches with a cyclic time span that's never ending. It's lifelong learning. So a dynamic curriculum co-design is interdisciplinary and has design processes and structures that allow for information flow. It creates space for new ideas and voices, for new people to sit at the table. It's no longer an academic sitting in an ivory tower in an office thinking, I'd like to maybe teach a course about this because that's my research interest. It's about realizing the world is changing. The course that I was teaching 20 years ago is no longer relevant. What do the students want to learn? How can we create this classical education that was based on Greco-Roman ideas of tripartite holistic learning and respond in real time with agility to adapt? It means having bottom-up flow, diversity, and transdisciplinary. And I think my closing thoughts, it's looking at learning as an ever evolving phenomenon that never ends. It's part of a deeply human, biological, life-giving experience. And it happens in relationship with our world and with others. It moves us from survival to thriving, to imaginative innovation. It's curious, it's playful, it's experimental, it's self-directed, and it's scaffolded. It is strategic foresight and planning for interconnected relevance. It's future-oriented and learner-informed. It's different at various stages, at different stages, and it's curated. We spoke also about this, the curation that's geared towards the learner's interests. It's transdisciplinary, holistic, involves the emotional and psychological aspects of social learning, the neuroscientific advances of learning, and it requires diverse communication. So different media and sensory delivery. It's inclusive, ecological content for sustainable learners and sustainable educators. It's human-centric, that's culturally aware, and also incorporates universal designs. That means practical, theoretical, experiential, and reflexive. It also has feedback loops with faster iterations and ethical technologies. It's set within ecosystems and systems thinking for lifelong viability. I hope this helped spark some ideas about how you might go about co-designing curricula for the future learner. I look forward to the dialogue. And if you have any questions about any of the concepts I've shared, I know it was quite a bit, please let me know.
Thank you, Mariam. That was very interesting. One of the things that I've enjoyed talking to you about is how looking at co-design really changes our view of what the stakeholder is and who the stakeholder is. You talked about the professor sitting in his or her ivory tower, looking at their bookcase going, I think I'll teach something about this because this is what my research is. Could you talk more about how you would involve other stakeholders and who those other stakeholders may be?
Absolutely. So I think this image talks about involving not just industry, but making the connections between the learner. So Matt spoke about the parents, and spoke about the learners. It's inviting people at all levels to provide input as to what kind of curriculum we need to design. And John, if I understand your question correctly, you're looking at specific people you would invite to the table to help you design a curriculum?
Yeah, I think that, we think about, sometimes we think about expanding stakeholders in curriculum design is interdepartmental. I'm going to do a shared curriculum between business and law. I'm going to do a shared curriculum between engineering and kinesiology. But you're really talking about co-design in a much broader level, it seems to me. Like you're talking about bringing in constituencies from outside the university. You're talking about bringing in parents. You're talking about bringing in students. You're talking about bringing in alumni.
Absolutely.
Industry.
And I think it comes back to this idea of ecological learning. So if we consider this as the system, we're looking at inviting everybody at every level. Somebody asked earlier in the chat during Matt's presentation about, elementary school teachers. And I think if we view learning as a process, as a lifelong process, then we're always engaged, and it changes our mindset and our attitude towards how we interact with not just curricula design, but with each other. And so when you ask who would you invite, absolutely, alumni. I would invite current students. I would invite prospective students. I would invite parents. I would invite industry leaders. And a lot of organizations have advisory boards and create curricula based on input, but that's only, from what I understand, after the courses have been developed. And so what I'm suggesting is to create these feedback loops within the system that are a slice of everybody that's impacted by the curriculum. And by that, my scope is quite large. And every organization and institution will have to define what their parameters are for themselves in terms of their boundaries. But this idea of having multi-stakeholders with multi-perspectives at the table designing that curricula.
So Preeti asked a related question here in the QA. She says, everybody's talking about lifelong learning. Please share your thoughts on the changes that you wish institutions should make to incorporate same. So I'm taking Preeti's question to be not only, blowing out the, who do you have create the curriculum to create to create co-design curriculum, but there are other changes that really open up the university to this lifelong learning, this environmental ecological learning that you display here.
Absolutely. And I think Matt touched on this earlier. The speakers mentioned the idea of looking at the student in the scope of a lifetime. And I think what that means is, for me, is rethinking the way that we do our offerings. For example, at Ryerson, we have a slew of offerings for retirees. It never ends. And I believe some of those are, the payment structure is dependent on the income of the people who are attending. So there's so many different varieties out there. And when we think about lifelong learning, I think it's looking at broadening our idea of what branding means within this ecological space. It could mean a curated degree between multiple institutions, not just different departments. It could mean that you create a membership that says you're able to come back throughout the course of your life for multiple degrees. There's so many different options out there. And I think, I'm not one to propose the answers, but I think I can ask the questions and suggest processes for people to come up with their own answers. And so my question to the attendee would be, I wonder what your definition of lifelong learning is, and what would you like to see? What have you seen in your life that you'd like to have reflected in institutions?
Well, one of the things that I think that you've alluded to, it's several times, and then we'll wrap up so we can move on to the next one here, is that we're talking about a time of fast obsolescence. If you're talking about lifelong learning, what you're going to learn out of a degree right now is going to be obsolete further down the road. So this really, even if you're focusing on lifelong learning to make your student a lifelong customer, as it were, you need to co-design that curriculum again by bringing in the industry and the community outside, so you know what the skills are that are coming up that you need to instruct your students for. And I think that's probably one of the things that you're looking at lifelong learning. It's not just being able to go back and learn something old. It's not able for me to go back and learn COBOL, but it's for me to go back and learn something that's brand new, but that the university has found out by actually involving the community in the curriculum design. So I think that thank you very much, Mariam. This has been a very interesting discussion. I really appreciate you taking the time to bring these ideas to us. This has been very interesting.